it's Joe Pardavila. This is the Forbes Books Podcast, and one of the few positives to come out of the pandemic has been our focus on work-life balance. With millions of white-collar workers forced to work from home for over a year, the lines between work and life were incredibly blurred. Some might say that the phenomenon known as the Great Resignation was in response to employees seeking more of a work-life balance. So how do we achieve that holy grail of work-life balance? My guest this week is a speaker, author, and researcher on implementing self-care strategies to promote work-life balance. He's also the host of the Get Balanced podcast and the author of Lead with Balance, How to Master Work-Life Balance in an Imbalanced Culture. His name is Donnie Hutchinson. Donnie, thanks for taking the time. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Joe. How are you?
I'm excellent. I guess I should get right into it and talk about work-life balance out of the box. How did you stumble into this focus? Because I'm always curious. I'm a big fan of like comic books and comic book superheroes, and I love the origin story. So what is your origin story for this sort of attention to work-life balance?
Well, actually, Joe, this came decades ago. When I first started in my career at Xerox Corporation, it was my first career job on the sales team at Xerox in Columbus, Ohio. And well, actually, this was in Dayton, Ohio for a short time. But you know what it was, Joe, is that as soon as I got hired and going through all this training and all this stuff, is that at the end of the day, the sales team, about a dozen people, would head down to the local tavern and drink a few beers together, right? I thought, hey, this is cool. I'm fresh out of college. I'm single. I work out in the morning, hang out with guys I work with and some ladies I work with. But what happened is that after a couple of weeks of doing this, like 3-4 nights a week, I kid you not, Joe, I'm looking at guys that are, in their 40s and one guy is in his 50s. And I just remember turning to them one night and I go, hey, aren't you married? And they're like, yeah, we're married. And I'm like, don't you have children, like small children at home? Yeah. And I'm like, what's your wife think about you staying out till, 9 o'clock at night? 3-4 nights a week with the single guys. Oh no, they're fine. Our wives are fine with it. Well, we know how that story worked out.
Yeah.
One of them got divorced pretty darn quick. The other guy, though, the unique thing about it is that he would stop by like at McDonald's or Burger King and bring in his sandwiches and big fries to the bar while he's drinking a few beers. But he was already overweight to begin with, significantly overweight. And, you've seen it in your career, I'm sure. People rushing, climbing that corporate ladder, but he didn't take care of his health. And he had a heart attack in his early 50s. Very sad story. And but you know what? It was at that point where it's like, man, I really just looked at it and thought, you know what? I want to have I was with a great company. I was like, I want to have a great career, but I also want to have a great family. And I have faith as sort of like a foundational piece for me. And then I was a college athlete, football player, track guy. And I was like, you know what? Health is always important. So before I realized it is like faith, family, career, and health were like my 4 pillars that I just operated my whole career off of. I just went with it and thought I got to keep those priorities in mind: faith, family, career, and health.
So if my math is correct, this is probably like 80s-ish. This is this epiphany. Am I 80s, 90s? Is my math right there?
Damn, Joe, I'm not that old. Come on.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, it was the 90s, early 90s.
And so early 90s, when you talk about work-life balance, I feel like it was pretty easy to see people's reactions to be like, Donnie, what the hell are you talking about? What is work-life balance? What does that even mean?
Oh, right.
How did you, I guess, find out more information about this? Because now, with all due respect, Donnie, I'm sure you could find hundreds of books about a work-life balance now. But in the 90s, how did you educate yourself or find out more about making sure that this balance exists in people's lives?
Well, my first thing is that as I climbed through the ranks, I left Xerox, went to some other companies, and then ended up in the human resource organizational development companies, and became president of various companies, and sort of just grew my career. But while I was doing it, I got married and I had 4 children. And as a executive for very fast growing companies, Joe, what I did is that I just always, that those four pillars, faith, family, career, and health, were just always important to me. Like I always exercise before I'd go to work, or at lunchtime I would exercise. And what I ended up doing is that, hey, when I remember, I'll never forget, I became the vice president of sales and chief operating officer of an organization. And I told the CEO, I go, hey, I'm going to be home by 6 o'clock every night to have dinner with my family. And the CEO is very cool about it because he's like, hey, I'm a big family guy. And he goes, I can appreciate that. And I go, but on the other hand, I'll come in and meet anyone at 4 or 5 in the morning if, we need to really have some lengthy meetings outside of the normal scope of business. And that's the way I sort of operated. I sort of looked at it as like, you know what? I'm going to be home every night at 6 o'clock to have dinner with my family, spend time with my children and all of that, put them to bed, I was always a hands-on father. And I just ended up managing myself that way. But then what I did is I ended up going to my management team that I was leading and said, you know what? I want everyone to be able to go home, have dinner with your family. I want all of your staff to be able to do the same. I'm not going to miss my kids' special events, whether that's a football game, soccer game, gymnastics, that type of stuff. We should be able to rearrange our workloads so that we can literally prioritize family as well as prioritize our business needs. And it just worked out wonderfully because I made sure that my management team made sure that their staff literally would make all of their events. They would take an inventory. I actually created this document where I call it the inventory sheet. It's like, hey, what is that staff member's, who's their spouse? How many children do they have? What are the ages of their children? What activities are their children involved in? What would that mom or dad, what are those activities that they would really like to go to that maybe are starting at 4 p.m? They don't want to ask for time off. But boy, how do they react when you say, you know what, I want you to make sure that, you go to that Wednesday soccer game at 4 o'clock. Let's rearrange the schedule so you can do that. I mean, people were just thrilled. And then, of course, I followed it up with the health, whether it's gym memberships, or I would never allow people to eat at their desk. I would always get on them about, go outside, start walking around, do something. I just basically, everything that I did for myself, I led others down that path to say, focus on your family, your health, your career. We're all here working, your faith, and let's just balance this out. And what I found, Joe, was we stopped competing with people's personal interests, their personal goals, because a lot of times people's personal goals will compete against a business goal. They're not always in alignment there, right? So instead of competing, let's support all the personal goals and initiatives. And wow, the payback that people gave was phenomenal. I never had anyone leave the companies that I was leading.
I was going to ask that just real quick. Like, what kind of high-performing individuals did you attract by having this? Because when you build that sort of culture, you build a culture of recruiters, because all of a sudden everyone that works there tells their friends, man, you got to work here. I don't know about what your place is, but my place over here, that I could actually go see my kids' recital or go to a soccer game. That must have been a huge magnet for high-performing talent.
Oh, it was. I mean, it just really, and I started doing all of this when I was going through my MBA in my early 30s. And I was in a great program to where I could apply things that I was learning in the classroom right into the organization. And people just love this kind of stuff because they were great recruiters. Our retention was phenomenal. And people came to work so happy. I mean, and they weren't, if something came up, someone's anniversary or something like that, I mean, we would know about it and we'd make sure, we'd remind people, hey, do you have dinner reservations yet? Come on, you need to get those dinner reservations and you need to take a couple hours off on that Friday that you're having that anniversary dinner. We would just focus on the people and not just their social things, but the health piece, from the, hey, did you go to the gym? Who's worked out 3 times this week? What are your goals? And we would incorporate these these work-life balance goals and objectives into reviews. When we're sitting down, I don't mean an annual review. I mean just, sitting down, let's have a one-on-one meeting. How are things going? Well, tell me about this, and this, And yeah, people just loved it. This isn't rocket science. I'm actually a little confused why more people don't do this. And we look at, Joe, I'm going to shift you here just a little bit to the COVID era that we're in. When we look at the comorbidities and the severe health risks of COVID, because of comorbidities, right? Whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's obesity, whether it's cardiovascular disease, diabetes, a lot of these are preventable diseases. And I think that's where tomorrow's leader, literally, hopefully it starts tomorrow, is we need to start leading people down this healthier path. It's the right thing to do. And it's really an ethical leadership perspective. I get fired up about it's being ethical, because I recently, just for a university textbook, I just finished a chapter on this about work-life balance and the ethical responsibility of leadership. I truly believe, because, once we as leaders, future leaders, we start looking at how can we lead the whole person, right? A holistic leadership, not just how much can we get out of them, a traditional motivational type leadership style, how much, can we get out of them in this period of time at work, but how can we help them as a whole person, with their family, with their health, if they have spiritual practices, make sure they have time for that. It's just, as I mentioned, it's not rocket science. It truly has such a large payback to the organization itself. But I think one of the keys to this, Joe, is that it's a lot like servant leadership. You can't fake it. It's really got to come from the heart. You really got to care for people.
And Donnie, where did this mindset come from? Is it like a nature versus nurture, where your mom and dad, were they all about work-life balance, or is this something that you sort of developed in your own adulthood?
No, they weren't about that at all. I did not get a lot of encouragement from my folks, or guidance at all. That's a different podcast.
All right, so we won't go there, because I was just curious, because it seems like it's such a generational thing. Donnie, as Gen Xers here, we feel like millennials are, and even Gen Z, they're the ones who've sort of pushing this work-life balance initiative now. But and obviously you were doing it well before that. So I would wonder whether it was just like a generational thing that was passed down to you, and that's how you stumbled upon it. But it's interesting that you didn't have it, yet you knew it. Was there a Oprah aha moment where you were like, yeah, this is important. Like, this is something, like, I mean, obviously you were successful in corporate ranks, but was there a moment where you're like, man, this sort of mindset that I've developed and these initiatives, this could be helpful for a lot of people. Let me go out and spread the gospel of Donnie Hutchinson and about work-life balance. What was that Oprah moment for you?
You know what it was is right when I became a professor at the University of Dayton, an adjunct professor, I included on one of I teach in the MBA program, so it was just one night a week, but I included a lecture on work-life balance. And I created this lecture on the 4 pillars of faith, family, career, and health. And I shared a lot of like what I just shared with you here, Joe, on the podcast. And what happened is that I received an email, because the class sort of closed out, and the semester closed out. I received an email from one of the students who told me, he goes, hey, by the way, I just wanted to share with you that I shared your podcast and your work-life balance concept with my father, and about how it's so important not to miss out on all the important things in life, and that we have to have a balance of the faith, family, career, and health. He goes, my father was in the middle of looking for a job, and he was getting ready to take a job that was 2 hours away from home. So he would have a 4-hour commute daily. Now, Joe, I know you're from New York, and if you live on one side of New York and the other side, it may be a 2-hour commute as well. But in Middle America, 2 hours is quite a
No,
commute.
I will say, even living down south, Donnie, anything over 25 minutes is like it seems like torture for folks down here. I remember when I moved to Charleston, I said to someone, "Oh yeah, I'm living in this one town over," and they're like, "You're living all the way out there?" And I'm like, it's like 15 miles. So I get your idea, what you're coming from, Donnie, that people outside of like major metropolitan areas, anything more than a 20-minute commute is sacrilegious. So I get that.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was that he in this email, he goes, after I shared what your lecture was about with my father, he actually turned down the job. And he said, you know what, that's not going to be fair on my family, and it's not going to be right on my health, spending 4 hours in a car each day, 20 hours a week. And he goes, my father wanted to basically said, if you ever thought about writing a book, wow, this would be a great time to do so. And then I shared this lecture again with another class, and everyone was like, why are you not writing a book?
Now, Donnie, you seem very forward thinking. Was writing a book not even like on your top 10 list of things to do at the time in your life?
It was not at this point. I was in the middle of actually working on my PhD, and I took my wife down to Charleston, by the way, and we are literally downtown Charleston we went to this really nice Italian restaurant, and we're standing by the bar having a glass of wine, waiting on our table, waiting to be seated. And this lady strikes up this conversation with me, about, what brings you down to Charleston? I just said, I brought my wife down here for her spring break. She's a school teacher. And I said, what brought you down here? She goes, I'm an author, and I came down for an annual retreat. This company called Advantage Family really works and does a lot of great work with authors. And I go, what is your book about? And then she told me she is a consultant, leadership consultant. And I was like, I do leadership consulting too. She goes, you ought to think about writing a book. And I go, do you have a contact? So she gave me Adam's contact information. I contacted Adam Whitty, and then the rest is history. Within a year, I had a book published.
Wow. I love to ask the sliding doors question, but could you imagine if you didn't have that sort of impromptu, serendipitous meeting with this person, if you would have taken the initiative right away to write a book? Like, have you thought about that?
I have not, because first I was like, I'm in the middle of trying to research and write a dissertation, so it's like, but it's like, I've got this book in me, I knew at this point it's like, I knew I had the book in me because of the lectures that I had been doing. And my research, my PhD work is on this work-life balance. It's on those pillars, right? So I incorporate self-care is essentially as the path to work-life balance is what my research is about. That moment when I thought, you know what, I do want to write this thing. And one thing led to another. I started writing. Advantage was so, just great to work with, the whole team and everything. It was incredible experience of writing the book. And I actually got to a point where it was about 6 months in, I hit a block, because I had a lot of other stuff going on. And I'll share this with your listeners. Because as I've been mentioning that, faith is one of the pillars, is that, I started praying about it. And I was like, God, do you really want me to write this book, finish this book and things like that? And before I knew it, and I've really never, I've shared this very few times. I was asking God, I frequently through life talk to God all the time. So I was asking God, and the next morning, I woke up without the alarm going off, and it was 5:55 a.m. I didn't think anything of it. Morning after that, I woke up, it was 5:55 a.m. I was doing some of my work up in my office. I go down to my kitchen, and I looked at the clock in the afternoon, the microwave clock, and it was 5:55 p.m. All of a sudden, Joe, I started seeing these balanced numbers, 3:33, 2:22, 10:10, every time I'd look at a clock. 3-4 times a day. And at first, of course, I'm like, am I playing games with myself? Am I just trying to look at the clock? But you know what? It was one of those things to where, it was not that. But it got to the point where it's like, my prayer was answered. Yes, I need to finish the book. And actually on my book, Lead with Balance, there's a picture of rocks on my cover. And if someone shines a really bright light on the big rock, you can faintly see, because I just put it in there in case I'd ever want to use the story, 555.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, those numbers have become such a part of my life. I've never been a guy for a tattoo, but I'm in the process of designing a tattoo.
Oh, wow. Your daughters must think you're like the coolest dad ever. Look at Dad getting a tat.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, oh gosh, all my kids, I'm going to include them in this though. Here it is.
Okay.
My middle, I'm doing a puzzle piece of a tattoo. So I'm the middle piece of the puzzle, and I have 4 children. And I'm going to give them an opportunity to design their own puzzle piece. Mine's going to have 555 in it.
Wow.
But then they'll get to do theirs. So now that I'm saying that on a podcast, I guess I better.
You got to do it.
Sure, yeah. I know it. Got to come through with this.
Donnie, you've talked about it as your pillars. It's a recurring theme about faith. It seems like faith has been a big driver for you, and I've always been curious about people that are, I guess, deeply spiritual or religious, and also the business acumen, because sometimes business and faith don't always align. I guess prior to now, where it was always a dog eat dog world where, you just got to destroy the competition and at all costs. Mm-hmm. How did you jibe that in terms of your progression in your career of faith and business? How do you handle that?
One of the things I do, Joe, and that's a great question, is, and where I came from too, as a college athlete, and then with Xerox, it was crush the competition. I mean, that's what it was all about.
Not very Christian, right?
No, not at all. And as I grew in my maturity, and I think faith as well, and when I started learning about servant leadership, the leading just to really serve others and to help others, that was a huge turnaround for me when I was like, wow, there's actually a leadership style out there about really helping others and doing good for others. And I do believe we are in a culture, we've been in this culture for such of a long time. You could go around today, Joe, in Charleston, and go around downtown Charleston, just ask 10 people, how do you define success? And they're going to talk about profit, return on investment, money. Mm-hmm. And that's, I call it I write about it all the time. It's the Wall Street Journal definition of success. Where I think the millennials, Gen Z, and a few of us Gen Xers out there that are trying to lead the charge is like, you know what? That's not success. You could have all the money in the world, buy a beautiful beach home out there on Isle of Palm. But if you don't have anyone to share it with, is that success? If you don't have any close relationships, is that success? If you don't have your health, is that success? So I started looking at it more from, it's a cultural shift to where we're starting to look at, hey, what is success, or better yet, perhaps, what is happiness? I'm not talking about happiness, hit your goals this month and then, increase the goals and try to hit it again. I'm talking about just really, truly being happy on the journey through life. Whether it's you become a new parent or, as a parent for the first time or whatever it is, but truly trying to enjoy where you are in life, sort of bloom wherever you are at this given moment, not to think that success is always down the road or something like that. We got to chase. Start looking at it as, wow, I truly want to enjoy this entire journey. And part of that journey is being very successful in a career. That's part of our journeys, I think. But then also success with our families, with our health, with our friends, with our perhaps community service or whatever, interests us so much. So, and I think with the faith piece, as I grew in my faith, and I just notice, I guess as you get older, you start thinking, wow, this life is pretty darn short.
Yeah.
And it's like days seem long, but boy, do those years fly by.
Yeah.
And start looking at things a little bit differently. And I see it. I see it in I see it in many different industries. There's a lot of things that intertwine with faith and careers. The more we can work with that, I think the better off we all become, instead of it being like, oh, that's, one of those things. We don't talk about politics and faith
Right.
and things like that. I was like, no, I go, and again, I write about this in the university textbooks, is that why don't we, instead of having like employee benefits, one size fits all, which by the way doesn't work, make it to where the supervisors can customize the benefit, such as if you're a Christian, you may want Good Friday off.
Right.
If you're Muslim, you may want another day off. If you're Jewish, you may want certain days off. If you're Hindu, allow benefits to serve the person's interests. And I think we would all be better served that way if we did that as leaders. So that's, I'm not here just to promote one faith.
Yeah, no.
I think we can all benefit from being kind and welcoming and respectful of all different faiths out there.
And so, Donnie, let me be a little devil's advocate here, because the idea of customizing benefits for an employee sound on the surface like a great idea for a small company, 0 to 100 employees. But what if a CEO who's listening right now has 500 employees, 700 employees, and he's probably thinking, there's no way I could customize 700 different benefit plans for people. What do you say to that kind of entrepreneur / CEO / boss?
What I say I'll talk to you right now, is that you're saying that because you're allowing the attorneys to run the show. You're saying it from a defensive position, versus if you create the benefit plans to where you allow your frontline managers, give them the flexibility, trust that they train them to do the right thing, and then trust that they'll do the right thing. But give them the flexibility. Have these floating holidays. Have these floating personal days. Essentially give them the guidance to lead that whole person and serve that person. And I truly believe that we can have these customized benefits for large corporations.
It just really, if you're willing to put in the work, right? Because that just doesn't happen with a flip of a switch.
No, it doesn't happen with the flip of a switch, but it truly is. I mean, it is such a defensive position that, we can't do this, we can't do that. And it all comes from the human resource departments. And those are departments that I used to run and things like that. So I get where they come from. However, it's not in the best interest of the person, because here's the flip side of this, Joe. The supervisors are already customizing benefits. Any supervisor out there today that's a boomer, and there's still many out there, right?
Yeah, they're hanging out for dear life. Absolutely.
Yeah. Those supervisors have the sign off on whether this person gets their leave request or they don't. I mean, that's general, based upon workload, stuff like that. I mean, they have that in the large organizations as well as small. But here's the deal. Do you think a boomer is signing off on paternity leave? The boomer himself, he probably had 3 or 4 children himself, and he may have missed 1 or 2 hours of work when that child was born. And now someone wants 6 weeks off? How inclined do you think that boomer is on signing off? They're not. And the research studies, I'm not giving you my personal opinion, I'm giving you evidence-based research. They don't sign off. What that tells me is they already have the flexibility to customize benefits. They're just not customizing them in the most appropriate and helpful manner. So it would take some training, and they need the training anyway, because most of these benefits are underutilized because supervisors are biased in what they sign off on. No, not surprising. I mean, there's biases everywhere.
Well, it's always no before yes. I've learned that in life, that it's always easier to say no to something. It's kind of sad, but it's sort of ingrained in all of us, that it's like your initial reaction to a question is now, no. And as opposed to being like, let me give it some thought. No, I'm gonna just give you a quick no. It's probably easier that way. And it's funny now that you have all these books of people, the power of no and everything like that. It's like, I think we've had no under control for quite a while. I think we've got that we've got the no subject handled pretty well. I want to circle back real quick because you mentioned the pandemic earlier, and a recurring theme to many of the conversations I had with a lot of CEOs and business leaders was this line exactly. Man, I can't believe how well my employees did working from home. I was so worried they weren't going to get their jobs done. And every time someone said that to me, I'm like, didn't you hire these people that you thought that you couldn't trust them to work from home just because you can't pop in their office? How weird is it that we live in a society where we're so obsessed with building teams and culture, but the minute that that the entire culture is forced home, we're like, oh my God, this is never going to work. Explain that to me, Donnie.
Well, I'm on your side. I can't believe that people didn't think that working from home would work. One thing that I find very interesting is that the pandemic hit when we actually had the tools to work from home. Could you imagine this hitting in 1990?
No.
I mean,
in any other era of our lifetime on Earth.
You're right. I mean, totally different. So, the challenge is, though, Joe, so we have CEOs that understand work can get done from home. And of course, it's going to be challenging. There's this, some people think that, yes, I want to stay at home. And I know corporations are struggling getting people back 5 days a week. However, there are some people that, they truly enjoy that work from home. But one thing that we do need to realize and talk more about, I believe, is that work helps fulfill our social need. And a social need is a universal need. Doesn't matter where you live or who you are on this earth. We're social creatures. Now, being social through Zoom, yes, there's a piece to it in social media. But truly being social and collaborating in the same room, we still have those needs. And I actually am a little concerned about the long-term effect of too much working from home. So with that, I do have a concern over that because of the social need. But for leaders and CEOs is that, we can get the work done from home. And I think the interesting part will be is to strike that balance, that balance for the person themselves, right? And I think it could help their work-life balance needs, but also strike that balance to where, what's the proper mix to receive for the corporation to receive the most productivity?
Yeah. Donnie, your concern is valid, but I think that's more valid for a young person maybe living alone, whereas opposed the flip side, if you're a person with a family like yourself and you're working from home, it's amazing. Like the times that you now have to see your kids driving to school that you didn't have before. I feel like the pros outweigh the cons, but when it comes to, I can see where you're saying where, say if you're like a 23-year-old kid out of college and all of a sudden you're spending 24 hours a day in your house by yourself, that could be disconcerting. So I see that I'm more concerned about those folks, the younger people who don't have that ability to go out and network and see all their coworkers. I get that, but for the person who's a family person, I think it's probably just the best way to live.
It is a nice way to live. I'm living that way. But I have my own business. And I have a daughter. My oldest daughter's in Los Angeles as a consultant. And the lockdown restrictions in LA.
They're pretty strict.
She has been working from home now. And she just started as a professional, her first career job 2 years ago. Well, a year and a half ago. And she's been working from home the whole time. And it's challenging, extremely challenging for the young ones. But I do agree with you. I mean, I teach some, as I mentioned in the leadership class I teach at University of Dayton. I teach some very nice organization called LexisNexis. I teach a cohort in their group, and they're all still working from home. But they do tell me about, I get to take my kid to school, or I go on a walk for lunch with my spouse. That is great stuff,
Yeah.
And then they get back in their home office and they go to it. They're happier. So I think there is this where do we make that great balance between, is it 3 days at home, 2 days in the office, or do you just, I think there's going to be some customization of that going on for long-term use of how we manage that office environment.
His name is Dr. Donnie Hutchinson. Check out his book, Lead with Balance, How to Master Work-Life Balance in an Imbalanced Culture. Donnie, thanks again for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Joe. My pleasure.
You're welcome, Donnie, and that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.